Destiny has been updated to patch 7.1.5, and there was only one particular patch note that people were latching onto: Graviton Lance's buff. Graviton Lance gained some popularity in Season 21 because of the increase in its rate of fire, going from 257 RPM, very specific, to a nice round 300. Bungie also rebalanced its damage per shot to have not as much damage on the second shot. It's slightly more even now. And in PvP, it ended up being a little too hot, and this patch nerfed some of its strength in PvP by reducing the damage that Cosmology does. However, this damage was not reduced in PvE, and Bungie also buffed the gun's damage by 67%. Not 6.7, 67. One of the largest buffs to a thing that I can remember in recent memory. It was done to actually bring it close to Revision 0, as they now share the same rate of fire. The changes that they made at the start of the season left the gun feeling very weak in PvE. This buff has turned Graviton Lance into an absolute menace. Let's start with the really good. Against red bar enemies, Graviton Lance is now dealing some of the highest damage among exotic primary weapons in the game, really only getting beaten out by sidearms. I know I haven't really discussed sidearms that much in PvE on this channel, but sidearm damage in PvE is very, very high, just for reference. Most of you probably know by now that I am in love with Quicksilver Storm, and in purely a primary fire versus primary fire battle, Graviton is pretty much destroying it, again, against red bar enemies. Graviton's main competition is, believe it or not, Revision 0's 2-burst fire mode, which actually does even more damage than Graviton Lance, but doesn't have the benefit of having an element attached to it. It's kinetic. But it's when you add in Graviton Lance's exotic perk, Cosmology, that makes Graviton Lance really go out of control, boosting its AoE potential through the roof, while something like Revision 0 is more focused on single target damage with its sniper rifle alternate fire mode. Where it starts to fall behind is against pretty much anything else. Orange bars, champions, bosses. You're just not really cranking out that much damage against these targets. Its strength is definitely against these junk tier enemies, red bar enemies, stuff that you're going to be able to kill quickly, get those cosmology procs, and just sort of AoE things down. The Disgraced is the GM Nightfall of the week as of this video, and has a lot of weaker red bar enemies in it, making this a great weapon to use for said GM. Any strikes that feature a lot of enemies bunching up, or a lot of red bar enemies in general, will very much suffer the wrath of Graviton Lance. Also keep in mind that in the footage of the Disgraced that you're watching right now, Void Surge is not an active modifier. So this could be doing even more damage than it's currently doing right now. I think which of these guns you end up choosing shouldn't even come down to a matter of DPS, at least not that much, but rather what you're going to need in terms of utility. If you're in a place that could use the AoE, then obviously Graviton is the play. But for example, most of why I like Quicksilver Storm so much is because of its ability to turn into a special or power weapon via its grenade launcher, and how often it can do it. Wave frames aren't really great at taking out bigger targets like higher tier orange bars or champions. They're more designed for AoE and groups of weaker enemies, and I really like to run with a wave frame in my favorite loadout right now. Quicksilver Storm makes up for the wave frame's single target weakness with the grenade launcher, and that's where you're going to find something like Revision 0 can also make up for that weakness, the sniper alt fire. You get that special weapon damage versatility, although definitely not as often as something like Quicksilver Storm. And I gotta say, even with Graviton's buffs, I still think Quicksilver Storm is going to be appearing in more of my loadouts because it can just do multiple jobs at a high level. Its primary fire is serviceable, it's fine, but it's that dual threat that is the main selling point. It certainly has an advantage in Season 21 as well, thanks to anti-barrier auto, which is strands only real weakness when it comes to anti-champion capabilities, despite the fact that, yes, you can just suspend barrier champions. Whenever pulse rifles get an anti-champion perk in the artifact, bet that Graviton will be making some more appearances. One weakness of Graviton is actually the fact that it's in the energy weapon slot. The Kinetic slot is notably weaker in weapon selection when it comes to legendary special weapons. You got, sure, Riptide, Deliverance, maybe the new Waveframe GL from the dungeon, Succession from Deepstone, but like, that's kind of it. I don't know, maybe the Iron Banner, Strand Fusion. I understand that Riptide is an incredibly strong weapon, very versatile, but, you know, still, you don't get that many options in the Kinetic slot for an energy weapon, whereas the energy slot has so many things to choose from. How about Graviton Lance versus something like Collective Obligation? After all, Collective is basically the Void Gun when you think of Void builds, at least it is for me. Part of that comparison is going to be about accessibility. Way more people are going to have Graviton Lance, a gun that's been in the game since D2 launch, that if I recall correctly, dropped from completing all the story missions on Titan, versus Collective Obligation, which is a raid exotic in an arguably above average difficulty raid for the average player. I mean, do the math, you know? Graviton Lance's advantage comes from the fact that it doesn't really require that much thought. It's point and shoot, and its raw damage output from the actual bullets that you're shooting is higher. Collective Obligation, on the other hand, requires a bit more effort to maximize rotating debuffs and maintaining them on the gun, but something like a Gerfalcon Hunter is going to be able to maximize the gun pretty easily, and the gun brings a lot of bonus debuffs to you and your team. All that being said, I totally understand if you just want to turn your brain off and shoot a gun and make a bunch of explosions, because it's really good now. Collective Obligation is also in a similar boat as Graviton, as its damage against non-red bar enemies is a little bit lacking, especially if it doesn't have any debuffs rolling. Regardless, I would care more about you having a cohesive build versus which one of these two guns that you're using. If you're a Gerfalcon Hunter, for example, run either gun, it's totally fine, does not matter. In anything below GM or master level content, I mean, Graviton has always been, you know, a decent weapon. You know, never super amazing, but never bottom of the barrel. Now, though, I mean, you're just going to be absolutely decimating everything. And it puts up a much better fight versus orange bars in lower tier stuff, but that shouldn't be that much of a surprise. It might as well be on the level of something like Trinity Ghoul when it comes to the making the game unfun for your teammates category, because you're just chaining kills so easily. The catalyst for Graviton used to give Hidden Hand, very good, a perk that no longer exists. But that was a bit underwhelming, so instead, Bungie gave it Turnabout. You know, Turnabout. And it also has Vorpal, Weapon. Neither of these perks are really game changers in my mind. Turnabout is a nice freebie to have, I suppose. It doesn't really hurt to have it, but the overshield doesn't work as a void overshield, so that kind of sucks. Vorpal Weapon on this gun, to me, feels pretty irrelevant because this is not a boss-killing gun. Malfeasance having Vorpal is cool because of, you know, something like Lucky Pants having those bonus damage shots dealing another 20% more damage to bosses is a really big deal there. Graviton is not Malfeasance. It doesn't gain a boost from Lucky Pants, and just because a gun has Vorpal Weapon on it does not mean that it's now a boss-killing weapon. It's a cool freebie, again, but I just don't think it adds a lot of value to the weapon. I am not using Graviton to kill champs or bosses or really orange bar enemies in higher tier content. I am using it to absolutely destroy red bar enemies and trash mobs, and then using my other guns to kill other things. Do yourself a favor, break this thing out again, play around with it. My exotic primaries good, legendary primaries bad advice is still very much in play, and the buffs that Graviton got have pushed this gun into the upper echelon. Hunters, your Gerfalcon setups are alive and well, and you now have a really good alternative to Collective Obligation in case you never got it, and in case you maybe were apprehensive about trying to make that build happen. Warlocks, you have a plethora of good Void exotics. Nezarec Sin is always an easy one for those just looking to have a point-and-shoot experience. Titans, Void World isn't nearly as exciting for us, but there's nothing stopping you from just throwing this thing on anyway and having some fun or changing things up. I'll probably be using this for fun for a little bit while it's flavor of the month, but like I said earlier, I think I still prefer Quicksilver Storm for when I really gotta get down to business because of its versatility and strength against non-red bar enemies, at least while I'm still rocking my GM Strand Titan build. Let me know how you're enjoying Graviton Lance. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.